Hey, everybody. On today's episode of the Messengers podcast, we are talking about marketing budgets. How much should you be spending? And primarily, how to actually account for all of the money that you're spending, whether it's with an outside provider or internally. Some really good information here on a topic we find a lot of small businesses struggle with. So stay tuned. We weren't recording that all the time.
Told you, 2-bottle podcast.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Messengers podcast. I am Chris Searles. With me today, obviously, maybe not obviously, but fortuitously, is Rob Seifert.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
Big word.
I don't really know what it means. It just sounded right. What do you want to talk about today?
Well, how about a problem that I come across fairly often with clients? We'll have a meeting and they'll come in and they'll want a plethora of
Hey,
communications materials.
it's
How's that?
it's the Thesaurus Day here on the Messengers podcast.
Right. People will come in and they really will, throw a whole bunch of printed materials and
A smorgasbord.
could be a smorgasbord of them. But what we try to do is narrow that down to a nice menu. And usually what helps with that is establishing a marketing budget.
Does that menu have crudité on it?
Yes, if you know what that is. Crudité.
We had a conversation the other day that nobody seems to know what crudité really is or how to spell it. So if you know what crudité is,
Kudos.
let us know. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead. Marketing budgets?
Yes, establishing a marketing budget because a lot of people don't really have a sense of what printing costs are or, any kind of marketing services. And they kind of throw a whole bunch of stuff at you. And when you give them the quote, they realize that that's way outside their budget. And I think establishing that from the beginning and understanding how to establish that is going to help them, define what they need to do on an annual basis.
Yeah. Well, I think, they try to work backwards because working forwards requires more effort and more thought and more planning. And it's a lot easier to say, well, here are all the things that I want to do. Just let me know how much they cost. And then I'll decide whether or not I feel like I can afford it.
Right.
And yeah, we see that all the time. And, rather than putting the time and the effort in up front to decide, what your marketing budget should be and how it should break down, and what you should be spending on what, and then kind of trying to find a way to make what you do fit into what you can afford and maximize that budget. And that's a lot of what we try to do when we work with all of our clients, but a lot of those clients that come in is try to force them to work on a budget first. Because it's a lot easier for us and for anybody out there that's listening to this, that's thinking about working with a company like us or a marketing agency or an advertising agency. It is significantly easier for us to work with your budget and plan within a budget and try to find the ways to maximize the dollars that you have to spend than it is for you to try to throw a bunch of ideas out there without any idea of what they're going to cost. Have us give you quotes and then you kind of look at it and not really know what adjustments you would need to make to get it to be something that could work within what you do feel like you have to spend and all that kind of stuff. So, it just ends up being this long drawn out process where nothing gets accomplished because it's just a backwards way to approach the topic. When if you came in and said, look, this is what my marketing budget is, this is what I'm spending on X, Y, and Z already, that stuff's going to stay where it is. What I want is you guys to, help out with this and this, and here's what I have. What do you think would be the best way to allocate that budget? Here's what I'm doing already. Here's what I've tried in the past that worked. Here's what I tried in the past that
Mm.
didn't work, or I haven't tried anything and I'm looking for a good starting point.
Right.
And that, but I feel like a lot of people are they're always hesitant to talk budget because they always feel like, well, if I go to a car dealer and I tell them here's what I can afford, they walk out paying that number,
Right.
right? And they feel, so it's at a certain point they almost feel like they're going to be taken advantage of, like, well, I told you that's what I had to spend and now it costs exactly that. That's kind of a
Uh-huh.
but you got to realize when you're working with a marketing firm, our goal is to allocate your budget. You are setting that budget because you want to spend it. You want to spend it on marketing,
Mhm.
whatever that entails. It's not that all of a sudden everything's going to cost more because we feel like, ooh, you have a nice budget and we're going to try to eat up as much of that as possible.
Right.
It's no, we can do more for you. We can provide better services. We can place more advertising. We can, there's more things that we can do to allocate the budget that you want to allocate to your marketing activities. We just need to know what we're
Right.
working with so we know what recommendations to make.
It might even help if they gave you a range.
Yeah.
Like if it was, this is, we'll spend at least this much if they're concerned about us, putting more, beefing up our quote for whatever reason. They could give us a range. This is how much the minimum we're going to spend, and this is the maximum. And then we can base a quote or a proposal on those variables and make recommendations. And then they can see, they can determine what they want to do after they receive that.
Yeah, and the bottom line with all of that is you're only going to keep working with us if you get a return,
Mm-hmm.
right? We've been in business for 45 years, and it's not because we're going to try to take all your money really quick right away and not deliver value for the money that you're investing into your marketing activities. If you're
Mm-hmm.
not seeing a return, you're not going to come back here. So, from anybody that does that, it's one thing if you're going to somebody who's just started a business and there's no reputation there and there's not really anything they weren't recommended to you and there's nothing for you to go off of
Mm-hmm.
to know whether or not they're going to be worth what you're spending. But ultimately, if you're working with somebody that has a good reputation, they have that reputation because they deliver value, not because they're just going to say, "Ooh, you have, $5,000 more than what we thought. So
Mm-hmm.
we're going to make an extra $5,000 on this project." That's not how it works. It's,
Right.
"Oh, you have $5,000 more than we thought. So here's what else we can do with that money to bring you more customers
Right.
to increase your revenue." And yeah, some of that might be our services that we're going to charge for because that's how we stay in business and make
Right.
our money. But all of those services should deliver value beyond what you're spending on them, which kind of brings another important point in is that you should be tracking that. We've talked about a bunch, and it's something that I hammer home and harp on all the time. That your decisions should be data based, and as long as you're tracking, okay, here's what I spent on this, here's the return that I got out of it, then you should very well be able to make the adjustments and the decisions that you need to make based on whether or not that was worth what you spent.
Sure. Yeah. No. It helps also, up front, where we started in the beginning, talking about clients coming in and not having any idea. If they can give us a sense of the money that they can spend on something, even if it's not an annual marketing budget, if it's, for this marketing effort that they're coming in to speak to us about, we can tell them right off the bat whether what they want to do is within that price range or not. They may come in and say, look, I want to do a catalog, full color, 60 pages to sell my product. And if they have a $5,000 budget, that's not going to happen. That's what we can help determine right away. But then if they say they have a $5,000 budget, we might be able to recommend an alternative to it.
Right.
That's going to help them.
I think sometimes I think what I see too is a nervousness, especially when dealing with new businesses and small businesses, and even smaller small businesses. That sometimes they're hesitant to talk budget because they're nervous that it's not enough,
Hmm.
and they almost don't want to. It's almost like they feel embarrassed by what that budget is and what they have to spend. And the bottom line is, we work with everybody across the board, and
Sure.
everybody's going to start somewhere. And it's certainly a lot easier to work with somebody that's honest about that and upfront and straightforward. And if it's not enough for us to do anything for you, we will let you know it's just not there. You're gonna have to find another alternative. There's other things that you can do.
Right.
If you need to bootstrap a business for a while, bootstrap the business for a while. Like everybody's got to start somewhere. Um, but so I think there's that element to it where sometimes they're nervous, and then I think there's the other aspect that I kind of touched on before, that they've not really done their homework on what they should be spending on marketing. I feel like marketing, and it happened to me, right? I got into marketing because when I started my first business, I had no idea how to get customers.
Hmm.
Like, it just wasn't even,
Sure.
we just didn't have any idea. We kind of, lucked into our, not really lucked, but lucked into our first one or two. Um, and then from there, it was all about, well, now we got to figure out how can we grow this? How can we actually get,
Sure.
and I got into marketing from that experience primarily because it was kind of a huge wake up call on the realities of running a business, which is you need clients, you
Yeah.
need customers.
Yeah.
It doesn't
You
matter how
build
good
your
you are at what
customer
you
base.
do, you need customers. Um, and I feel like a lot of people start businesses that way, where it's, I do this thing really well. I'm going to start a business because I do this thing really well. And there's not really a lot of planning that goes into, beyond family and friends or word of mouth or whatever. How
Hmm.
am I going to grow this business? How am I going to actually get more customers? And so I think there's a lack of research and knowledge that goes into, what should my marketing budget be? How much money should I spend
Yeah.
acquiring new customers? And there's some general guidelines and rules of thumb that I guess are valuable to kind of talk about. For the most part, like a B2B company, if you're selling B2B, you tend to spend a little less of your total revenue on acquiring on marketing in general. Um, and usually that number is somewhere between about 2 and 5% of annual revenue. So for every $1 million a year in revenue you're doing, you should be spending $20,000 to $50,000 in marketing.
Hmm.
For B2C companies, that number can be a lot higher. Typically you find then 5 to 10, maybe even 12% or so of annual revenue spent on marketing. That number, a lot of times in a consumer focused company, is going to be significantly higher in the first year,
Hmm.
2 years, 3 years, as you're trying to actually build some
Build it.
awareness and build the business. And I think those numbers kind of shock some people sometimes, that are doing, if you're doing 2 million a year in revenue, that's a nice business for sure. It's not huge, but it's a good business. But for a lot of people that are used to, well, I built my business on word of mouth, or, we've been around for a long time, and we've seen kind of a steady decline now in customers because we're not really investing in marketing. We haven't been in a while. Or, to look at that and say, well, I should be spending somewhere between $40,000 and $100,000 a year on marketing, when you've been spending 10, is a significant increase in what they're looking at. And I think that can be kind of a bit of a sticker shock
Right.
right away, to realize what you really should have been allocating all along to your marketing budget, so that business didn't start to slow down and decline. And, that's what it takes to actually, make that happen.
Right.
But I think that's kind of a big issue that people aren't doing the research that's required to actually come up with, okay, what's a starting point and feel comfortable in, well, this is what other people in my industry are doing, what other people in my market are doing, and and actually even doing the industry specific, because that can change. Those are really, really general guidelines to
Sure.
give people that are listening to this some sort of an idea, but I mean that can change by double or triple depending on what industry you're actually in, and what you're selling and who you're selling to, and how much it costs to really reach those customers. Um, you know, all that kind of stuff really will certainly affect what you're spending.
Yeah, I know we have these conversations and meetings with clients when they come in, kind of how you're explaining it now, what a start point is for budgets and things. And I think a lot of the times and what we see a lot is the clients are just completely unprepared. They try to take notes on what we're recommending, and then they say they're going to come back with some answers, but they never do. It's almost like we should, put together a worksheet or something like that, or a white paper that they can download, so that it kind of helps them walk through the steps of what'll help them establish a marketing budget, so we can better help them. Because I know once we have that information, we can come up with the best recipe,
Yeah,
for their marketing plan.
that's a good idea. We should do that.
Well, I just came up with that.
um, yeah, and again, I think that really comes down to, we see, and even talking to a lot of small business owners and stuff like that, there's this idea that, well, we're not a big company, we don't do budgeting, we don't do all that kind of stuff, and like here we don't really do formal budgeting either.
Hmm.
You're a creative director, you don't have a budget for your department for the year
Right.
that you have to fall within. We evaluate purchases, we know, generally, I mean, it's a small business, so we know, generally speaking, here's what we need to spend every year on software. That's just going to be
Hmm.
what it is. We have subscriptions that we need. We know how many computers are here, what their ages are, when they're going to kind of age out, when we're going to need to reinvest in new equipment, and all that kind of
Sure.
stuff. So we don't necessarily need to put together a formal budget to say, okay, Rob, here's how much money you have to spend on upgrades and software and new
Hmm.
equipment and this, whatever it is this year. That stuff just doesn't need to happen. But from the same standpoint, to kind of try to apply that as a blanket statement across your business, to say, well, we don't do budgeting, we don't need to do budgeting. Um, I think a lot of times is used as a cop out for not doing the work that you really should be doing to be a good steward of your business, um, which is sitting down and figuring out, what really should I be spending on my marketing, and then actually tracking what you're spending, tracking um, how successful it is. And I think people like to just not put the effort and the time into that. And like you're saying, that's what happens when we start to talk about, okay,
Hmm.
break that down, give us a budget, find out what you spent last year, let's look at how well it actually performed, and let's see if you do need to make adjustments based on that.
Right.
And a lot of times we're not able to get that information out of them because nobody wants to do the work and put the time in that it takes to do that.
Right.
And then it ends up just being this project based, okay, well, we're just going to do this brochure then, instead of
Right.
really working on a marketing plan.
On.
Because again, then that marketing plan takes time and effort to really
Right.
put that together, and then really and decide how you're going to track how it's successful, and then do the work to track whether or not it was successful, and then do the work to make changes based on whether or not it was successful.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times on the small business side, that stuff is used as a cop out, not to do the work that you really should be doing to run your business the right way.
Yeah. I know, recently we've been talking about doing some materials internally, to help kind of spell these things out. In terms of print, in any case, we're talking about putting together a catalog for print options, like recommended, packages where, people can come in and maybe get an understanding of, okay, this is a starter package for print. But maybe we could take it a step further ourselves if we can find the time to do something that's going to be like a recommended marketing package and associate costs with it. Maybe that would alleviate some of these issues when clients come in and say, this is, that we could even try to base it on a goal, say the goal of this marketing package would be, to gain new customers or
Yeah, and I think there's some of that, from our standpoint, trying to make things easier on our customers is part of how we market ourselves and
right.
do that from the standpoint of trying to communicate ideally to those business owners through this medium, through the podcast and things like that. I would say don't rely on that.
Hmm.
Do the work, put the work in, figure out what you're spending on your marketing, figure out what you should be spending on your marketing based on whether or not what you're doing right now is working.
Right.
So from our standpoint, yeah, I mean, it's great for us to kind of do stuff like that tries to make it easier on customers that we know either aren't going to listen to this or aren't going to take that advice and still aren't going to put the work in. And so for us to say, well, this is what we're doing for those customers because they still want those services and need those services. And, ideally they'll still get value out of those services,
Right.
even if they don't put in the work that they should be putting in to do it.
Right.
Ultimately put the time in.
Sure.
And it really doesn't take that long. It really is not that difficult.
Right.
It just seems like it's one of those tasks that nobody really wants to do. So it just doesn't get done.
Right.
And I think one of the issues, a lot of times too, is people neglect to account for all of the things that they're doing that should be accounted for within that marketing budget. And I think sometimes that's where some of the sticker shock comes in too, is we'll say, well, this is kind of what, we feel like you should be spending.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll look and go, we're not anywhere near that.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you start talking about, well, yeah, but you're not accounting for all of your web design and development costs and your hosting costs on your website and what you're paying to, MailChimp or whoever your email marketing provider is.
Mm-hmm.
Things like social media. How much time are you and your staff putting into managing your social media accounts? Account for that time. Give that a cost, right? There's a cost associated with that. You're paying
Sure.
somebody to do that work, or you're doing it yourself and paying yourself to do it, or there's an opportunity cost involved in that if you're doing it and not doing something else. So give that a number and account
Sure.
for how much time you're putting into that. And
Mm.
that's part of your marketing budget,
Yeah.
content development, all that kind of stuff. All should be included in that marketing budget, even if it's being done internally,
Right.
accounted for, in terms of how much time it's taking. And a cost should be applied to what that really costs you to do. That person that you have in your office that's managing your social media costs you money to sit in that desk, use that computer that you provided, use that, that internet service that you provide, the air conditioning that you use in your building, the desk that they sit at, the space in the building that you're paying for in rent, or, all of that stuff should be accounted for in what it's costing you to produce that.
Right.
Come up with a number, apply that to the amount of time that they're putting in, and use that as part of, yes, that's part of my marketing budget. That's what's going into it. That's what it's costing me.
Yeah, I find that a lot of the time with print budgets, clients will come in and say, we just want you to print it and we're going to do the mailing. And that's something we consider with that budgeting too, is we have to explain to them that it's probably going to be cheaper if they just do the mailing here because of that. Because
Almost
they have
always.
to account for purchasing labels that they're going to put on there, the toner they use in their printer, the the manpower it takes to maintain their database, output those labels and adhere them and organize it all and take it to the post office. If they consider all those factors, all those costs, it's going to save them money to have someone else do it. And their office is going to be more productive.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people, when it's explained to them that way, have a realization and understand that it makes sense to do it that way.
Well, and that's something we talk about a lot, right? And we have to talk to customers about that a lot. And, we have that conversation a lot of times
Sure.
with, well, I'm just gonna, in that specific conversation, I'm just gonna buy some Avery labels. I'm gonna run them through my printer in my office, and have somebody stick labels on, and stick stamps on, and we're gonna send them out because we don't want to spend the money to have somebody else do that for me when I have somebody sit in my office that
Mhm.
can do it. But those are the same people that are complaining that they don't have time to actually market themselves on social media or do those kinds of things, right? Where
Mm. Right.
that person could be doing that, or any of the
Sure.
thousand other things that you feel like you don't have time to get to that you could allocate to that person. And then it's the same, we talk about that a lot, where even for shorter run stuff, and and especially for addressing and labels and things like that, where not only are we not going to put a label on something so it's
Mhm.
going to look like crap, it's actually going to be printed direct on there, and this under the same process that the rest of the piece is being printed with.
Right.
So it's not going to look like garbage. You're not going to have to spend 2 days affixing late printing and affixing labels. Then somebody, actually bringing it to the post office and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
But it's also, they don't understand. Most people look at, and we're kind of unique in this conversation that we have to have with our customers a lot, because we do offer commercial printing services here. But um, they look at like the toner, for example, that they use in their office printer, or just the wear and tear on an office printer, and it doesn't get accounted for anywhere
Mhm.
because it's just an office supply,
Yeah. Right.
right? But they might go through a $50 container of toner for something that, the total cost for us to do it was going to be $40 or
Mm.
whatever that number is.
Sure.
But they don't look at it that way, because they don't actually account for that cost the right way. It
Mm.
gets accounted for as an office supply, instead of, well, I went through that because I printed out all these labels. That's really part of my marketing budget. It's what I spent on the cost of this piece that we put together.
Sure.
And that's where accounting for costs properly can make a big difference in not only the realities of what your marketing budget really is, and understanding that, but then knowing how to actually, the most effective way to actually accomplish some of the things that you're looking to accomplish.
Right.
That's a good example for sure of when we see that.
Yeah. I see. I don't know if we're getting off the topic of budget, but I see several of our clients have made purchases of commercial digital printers to use in house because they think they're going to save on printing costs. And I can't tell you the amount of them that find the equipment just too technical to deal with and to accomplish what they want to accomplish. And when they get in a bind, even though they're paying for this
Hmm.
printer in house and they're not cheap, they need us to print the job because they know they're not going to be able to get it done on time and done right. So,
Hmm.
for those of the people that are considering that, it's something else. I know they're being marketed that way to be used in small businesses, these pieces of equipment, but they're pretty complicated. I mean, we deal with it constantly, in house. So,
Well, and that in particular, like digital printing and stuff like that, for some people, it makes total sense. If you're doing, and there are a lot of companies, even bigger company, and a lot of it, there's actually a lot fewer than there used to be because of the just how the print industry is changing. But a lot of companies have in-house print shops. A lot of universities used to
mhm,
have,
sure.
in-house, print shops and all that kind of stuff, because they were just doing volumes that kind of justified having that. A lot of them have kind of moved away from that, but from the digital side, it's allowed a lot of those organizations then to bring something in that allows them to do proposals and presentations and things like that, where you need 10 of something and you need it right away. um, it's a good option to have
Mhm,
in house. uh, what we tend to find, though, is it becomes a limiting factor,
mhm,
because they don't have then the finishing capabilities that we have,
mhm,
where they can't bleed a job
mhm.
because they don't have any way to cut that job after it's been printed.
Right.
um, and so we definitely see that. And then not only that, they don't account for the cost differences in paper, and what they pay for paper from Staples versus,
Mm.
when how much do we how much paper do we buy in a year, and the discounts that we get on
Buying it.
paper. And even after it gets marked up,
Buying
it's
in
still
bulk.
cheaper
Right.
than what you're going to pay for a ream of paper, or, whatever
Sure.
you're buying from state. Or, we had one customer that put in a machine and then started buying paper from us
Hmm.
because they couldn't get the paper that they wanted to use from from an office supply store, and they didn't have any other place to go for it because they don't buy a lot of it.
Right.
And the only reason we even said yes and we'll do it for you is because it's a really good client. We still do a ton of work for them. They just wanted, again, an in-house option for some, when they do 10 posters or they do, stuff like that. But but again, it's all of those costs that don't, it's not gonna, it doesn't mean that, there's this huge cost savings because you're not outsourcing the work anymore. A lot of times with us, we find it's cheaper for our customers to outsource the work to us than to try to do it
Right.
in-house.
Even if the cost is the same, again, they have to consider the man hours that they're
Exactly.
putting into it. And that's, that's a big part of it.
Yeah, and it comes down to actually accounting for what you're doing,
Right.
and really accounting for it, not just saying, okay, well, here's what my bills were from this company, and when we did it in house, here's what we paid on, advertise,
Right.
Paid for advertising or whatever. Account for the time, account for everything that's actually going into doing what you're doing,
Right.
and then make educated decisions from there.
Sure.
Hey, what's up, YouTube? Thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Click the links for more from the Messengers, and visit us at messengers.blog for links to our social and more exclusive content from the Messengers.